Hi students, I hope you are enjoying my video lectures. I am back with a new video lecture. As you have uh, seen my video lectures on first chapter, digestion and absorption. Now I am with a new video lecture as we are in the chapter of breathing and exchange of gases. We have already gone through my 4 video lectures. This is the 5th video lecture, and from now onwards I'll be using little bit of Telugu and Hindi for my explanations. So you can enjoy my video lectures, and by watching these video lectures you can gain correct concepts, and clear cut conceptual understanding will be done for you. And you must observe video lectures very carefully, and watch it very carefully, and note down all the points and remember them. So in this video lecture we'll be going through the remaining topics of this chapter. So as there are few students who could not follow completely in English, so from now onwards I'll be using a little bit of Telugu and Hindi for you. So it will be very easier for you to understand all the concepts very clearly. So follow my lectures, and subscribe the channel, and like and share the channel and comment. Okay, so here is a quote for you. I'll be always starting my lecture with a quote. So dear NEET aspirants, focus on understanding the concepts and don't try to blindly memorize everything. So this is for all the NEET aspirants, that you must focus on understanding the concepts and not to try and you should not try blindly to memorize everything. So by memorizing you can't remember all those things. You will be losing many of the things if you simply memorize everything without understanding. So a clear cut understanding is required to do all type of questions in NEET. NEET is a very tough exam which is conducted in India, so it is not easy to get a MBBS seat. So I suggest all the NEET aspirants to try to focus on understanding the concept, not simply trying to blindly memorize everything. So if you memorize, you will memorize for only few days, but if you understand the concept, then it will be fixed in your brain. You can recall it anytime if you want. Okay, so this is my sincere suggestion for you. Focus on understanding the concept, and don't try to blindly memorize everything. So the topics to be covered in this lecture are transportation of oxygen, HAEMOGLOBIN dissociation curve, factors affecting the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So all these topics we will be covering in this lecture, and this is a very important, very useful lecture for you. So in this lecture you will be understanding how the oxygen is transported and how the carbon dioxide is transported into our body. So oxygen, which is very essential for our life, so that must be transported, and it must be supplied to the cells. Each and every cell in our body must get oxygen. So this oxygen, it is shown very clearly in this figure here. You can see that oxygen is dissolved in plasma and also in hemoglobin. Oxygen is binded with hemoglobin. So only 1.5% of oxygen is dissolved in plasma, and 98.5% of oxygen is binded with hemoglobin. So as oxygen cannot mix with water, it can only bind with the hemoglobin very easily. So only very little amount of oxygen is transported with the help of plasma, but 98.5% of oxygen is transported through hemoglobin. So this oxygen which is bonded with hemoglobin and it is in the deoxygenated blood will become oxygenated and the oxygen is diffused into the blood. So this oxygenated blood from the pulmonary vein, it enters into the right atrium, and in the right atrium it moves to the right ventricle, and from the right ventricle this oxygenated blood with the help of systemic capillaries, systemic aorta and systemic capillaries, it is transported to tissues. In the tissues this oxygen is utilized in the aerobic process, aerobic respiration, cellular respiration, and CO2 is released. So you can see clearly in this figure that how much amount of CO2 is transported. So you can see only 7% of CO2 is dissolved in plasma, and 23% of CO2 is binded with hemoglobin, forming carboxyhemoglobin, and 70% is 70% of CO2 is transported in the form of a carbonic ion, that is HCO3 minus. So this all these numbers and all these percentages, you need to remember them very clearly, that 7% of CO2 is dissolved in plasma, and 70%, that is the highest percentage of CO2, is transported in the form of carbonic ion, that is HCO3 minus, and 23% of CO2 is transported with the help of with the binding with hemoglobin. So you can see all these things very clearly here. So this deoxygenated blood is transported to right atrium. So from the right atrium it goes to the deoxygenated blood goes to the right ventricle. From the right ventricle, with the help of the pulmonary artery, this deoxygenated blood goes to the lungs. So in the lungs again the exchange of gases occurs and the deoxygenated blood will become oxygenated. So in this lecture we are going to see all those things, how the transportation of oxygen is going to take place, and about oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve, and also factors affecting the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So as I told you that in this lecture we are going to use little bit of Telugu also. Definitely somewhere wherever required we will be using Telugu and Hindi. So here transportation of oxygen. You can see here oxygen does not dissolve easily in water. So only about 2 to 3% of inhaled O2 is dissolved in blood plasma, which is mostly water. So blood plasma is having mostly water, that is why oxygen cannot dissolve easily in water. About 97 to 98% of O2 is bound to hemoglobin, which is present in the RBC in red blood cells. So each 100 ml of oxygenated blood contains the equivalent of 20 ml of gaseous O2. The amount dissolved in the plasma is 0.3 ml and the amount bound to hemoglobin is 19.7 ml. The heme portion of hemoglobin contains 4 atoms of iron, each capable of binding to a molecule of O2. Oxygen and hemoglobin bind in an easily reversible reaction to form oxyhemoglobin. So we need to understand this, that oxygen and hemoglobin bind in an easily reversible reaction to form oxyhemoglobin. You can see that 4 iron atoms are present in one hemoglobin, and these 4 iron atoms, each iron atom can bind with one oxygen. So total hemoglobin can bind with 4 molecules of oxygen. So you can see here oxygen and hemoglobin will bind in a reversible reaction. That is, after the once oxyhemoglobin is formed, and again it dissociates into oxygen and hemoglobin near the tissues, and the oxygen enters into the cells of the tissues. So this is the transport of oxygen. In the transport of oxygen, you can see that only 2 to 3% of oxygen is dissolved in plasma. So 2 to 3% of oxygen మాత్రమే ఆ ప్లాస్మాలో డిజాల్వ్ అవుతుంది, అండ్ 97 to 98% ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్ తోటి బాండ్ అవుతుంది. హెమోగ్లోబిన్ హీమ్ అనే పోర్షన్లో హెమోగ్లోబిన్లో 2 parts ఉంటాయి. హీమ్ ఉంటుంది. హీమ్లో దెర్ ఆర్ 4 iron atoms. So next we will discuss about factors determining binding of O2 to hemoglobin. The most important factor that determines how much O2 binds to hemoglobin is partial pressure of oxygen. So ఇక్కడ చాలా ఇంపార్టెంట్ ఫ్యాక్టర్ ఏదైతే ఉంది, that depends ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్తో డిపెండ్ అవ్వడానికి there are certain factors. సో ఈ ఫ్యాక్టర్స్ మీద డిపెండ్ అయ్యి ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్తో బాండ్ అవుతుంది. సో ఆ ఫ్యాక్టర్స్లో ఫస్ట్ ఫ్యాక్టర్ ఈజ్ partial pressure of oxygen. So partial pressure of oxygen అనేది చాలా ఇంపార్టెంట్ ఫ్యాక్టర్. So when all the reduced hemoglobin is completely converted to oxyhemoglobin, the hemoglobin is said to be fully saturated. సో ఇప్పుడు మనకు హెమోగ్లోబిన్ అనేది ఆక్సిజన్తో కంప్లీట్గా బైండ్ అయితే దెన్ దాన్ని ఫుల్లీ సాచురేటెడ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్ అంటాం. when a hemoglobin consists of a mixture of hemoglobin and HbO2, సో అప్పుడు దాన్ని పార్షియల్లీ సాచురేటెడ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్ అంటాం. సో when PO2 is low, PO2 అనేది తక్కువగా ఉన్నప్పుడు, పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది తక్కువగా ఉన్నప్పుడు hemoglobin is only partially saturated. So the greater the partial pressure of oxygen, the more O2 will bind to hemoglobin until all the available hemoglobin molecules are saturated. So ఇక్కడ oxyhemoglobin dissociation curve గురించి we can discuss here. So in this percentage saturation of hemoglobin is taken on y-axis and partial pressure of oxygen is taken on x-axis. So you can see that this is a sigmoid curve, as it is a S-shaped curve is formed when partial pressure of oxygen is taken on x-axis and percentage saturation of hemoglobin is taken on y-axis. So you can see here the percentage saturation of hemoglobin is low in deoxygenated blood contracting skeletal muscle, and it is also percentage of saturation. You can see that when the partial pressure of oxygen is only 40% in deoxygenated blood in systemic veins, then only percentage of saturation of hemoglobin is also only, you can see that 70 to 80. But in the systemic oxygenated blood in the systemic arteries, you can see that the partial pressure of oxygen is 100 PO2. Then you can see that the percentage saturation of hemoglobin is also lies between 90 to 100. So this is shows the variation that it shows that the factor PO2 is directly proportional to percentage saturation of hemoglobin. So oxygenated blood in systemic arteries, you can see the partial pressure of oxygen is 100, then percentage saturation of hemoglobin is also 100. And in the systemic veins deoxygenated blood, you can see that the partial pressure of oxygen is 40, then the percentage saturation of hemoglobin is also lies between 70 to 80. And in the contracting skeletal muscle, you can see that partial pressure is only 20, partial pressure of oxygen is only 20 mm of Hg, then you can see that the percentage saturation of hemoglobin lies between 30 to 40 only. So you can see the variations, how the partial pressure is affecting it is an important factor in binding of O2 to hemoglobin. You can see this very clearly. So transportation of oxygen. When the partial pressure of oxygen is between 60 to 100 mm of Hg, hemoglobin is 90% or more saturated with O2. So you can see in this very clearly. So factors affecting the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So as acidity increases, pH decreases. As acidity increases, the affinity of hemoglobin for O2 also decreases. So here the another factor is pH. So affinity, what is the meaning of affinity? We will see here. What is the meaning of affinity? Means it is the binding capacity. It's called affinity. So as acidity increases, the affinity of hemoglobin for O2 decreases. So it is inversely proportional. So if acidity increases, when acidity increases, when pH value decreases, then acidity increases. So if acidity is increasing, then the affinity for oxygen to hemoglobin also decreases. The main acids produced by metabolically active tissues are lactic acid and carbonic acid. When pH decreases, the entire oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve shifts to right side. When pH decreases, the entire oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve shifts to the right at any given PO2. So it says that hemoglobin is less saturated with O2, a change termed as Bohr effect. So the Bohr effect works both ways. An increase in H in blood causes O2 to unload from hemoglobin, and the binding of O2 to hemoglobin causes unloading of H from hemoglobin. So this is the Bohr effect. An increase in H in blood causes O2 to unload from hemoglobin, and the binding of O2 to hemoglobin causes unloading of H from hemoglobin. So this is called Bohr effect. Elevated pH increases the affinity of hemoglobin for O2 and shifts the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left. So elevated pH increases the affinity of hemoglobin for O2 and shifts the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left. So elevated pH means high pH. So high pH is increases the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So low pH decreases the pH is directly proportional to the binding of hemoglobin for oxygen. Affinity of hemoglobin for O2 directly proportional. Acidity is inversely proportional. So when acidity increases, pH decreases, as you know that. So the affinity of hemoglobin for O2 shifts the oxygen hemoglobin dissociation curve to the left. So it can be seen in the graph also that hemoglobin saturation you can see here. When the pH drops below normal levels, more oxygen is released. The oxygen hemoglobin saturation curve shifts to the right. So what is the effect of partial pressure of CO2? CO2 also can bind to hemoglobin, and the effect is similar to that of H shifting the curve to the right. So PCO2 and pH are related factors because a low blood pH results from high PCO2. So as the CO2 enters the blood, much of it is normally converted to carbonic acid, a reaction catalyzed by enzyme carbonic anhydrase in RBCs. As CO2 enters the blood, much of it is temporarily converted to carbonic acid, H2CO3, a reaction catalyzed by enzyme carbonic anhydrase in RBCs. So CO2 also can bind to hemoglobin, and the effect is similar to that of H shifting the curve to the right. PCO2 and pH are related factors because low blood pH results from high PCO2. So low blood pH results from high PCO2. So when there is high PCO2, then it causes low pH. You can see here the carbonic acid thus formed in red blood cells dissociates into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. So here temperature within limits, as temperature increases, so does the amount of O2 released from hemoglobin. So temperature in that within limits, as temperature is increasing, the amount of O2 released from hemoglobin is also increasing. Heat is a byproduct of metabolic reactions of all the cells, and the heat released by contracting muscle fibers tends to raise body temperature. So when the temperature rises, more oxygen is released. The oxyhemoglobin shifts to the right. When the temperature rises, you can see that more oxygen is released. The oxyhemoglobin saturation curve shifts to the right. Metabolically active cells require more O2 and liberate more acids and heat. The acids and heat promote release of O2 from hemoglobin. So fever produces a similar result. In contrast, during hypothermia, lowered body temperature, cellular metabolism slows, the need for O2 is reduced and more O2 remains bound to hemoglobin. So factors affecting the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen, you can see metabolically active cells require more O2 and liberate more acids and heat. So the acids and heat promote release of O2 from oxyhemoglobin. Acids and heat promote release of O2 from hemoglobin. Fever produces a similar result. In contrast, during hypothermia, you can see that cellular metabolism slows, the need for O2 is reduced and more O2 remains bound to hemoglobin. So we have discussed the different factors affecting the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen. So BPG is another factor. Now, as we have seen all the things we have discussed in English only, so now we'll try to discuss the things in Telugu, repeat in Telugu also. So you can see here oxygen అనేది 2 to 3% of inhaled air లో ఉన్న ఆక్సిజన్ వాటెవర్ ఎంత ఎయిర్ మనం అయితే ఇన్హేల్ చేస్తామో అందులో 2 to 3% మాత్రమే ప్లాస్మాలో డిజాల్వ్ అవుతుంది. 97 to 98% of O2 present in the inhaled air will bound to hemoglobinతో బౌండ్ అవుతుంది. సో ఆక్సిజన్ each 100 ml of oxygenated blood contains the equivalent of 20 ml of gaseous O2. సో ఇక్కడ మనం చూడొచ్చు ద మోస్ట్ ఇంపార్టెంట్ ఫ్యాక్టర్ ఏదైతే ఉందో అది పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్. ఎంత పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ ఎక్కువ ఉంటే అంత ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్తో బాండ్ అవుతుంది. సో అదే మనం ఇక్కడ గ్రాఫ్లో చూస్తున్నాం. పార్షియల్ ప్రెషర్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ని పర్సంటేజ్ ఆఫ్ సాచురేషన్ని మనం గ్రాఫ్లో వేసుకుంటే వీ కెన్ సీ అది మనకు గ్రాఫ్ అనేది సిగ్మాయిడ్ కర్వ్లో వస్తుంది. సో ఇక్కడ ఇంకో విషయం చూడొచ్చు, అనదర్ ఫ్యాక్టర్ దట్ ఈజ్ pH లేకపోతే అసిడిటీ. సో అసిడిటీ ఇంక్రీజ్ అవుతే pH అనేది డిక్రీజ్ అవుతుంది, అండ్ ఆ ఇంక్రీజ్ అయిన అసిడిటీ లేకపోతే డిక్రీజ్ అయిన pH అఫినిటీ ఆఫ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్ని ఫర్ ఆక్సిజన్ని డిక్రీజ్ చేస్తుంది. సో ఒకవేళ మన బాడీలో యాసిడ్స్ కనుక ఇంక్రీజ్ అమౌంట్ ఆఫ్ యాసిడ్స్ రిలీజ్ అయి ఉంటే అవి హెమోగ్లోబిన్ ఆఫ్ ఆక్సిజన్ని బైండ్ చేసే హెమోగ్లోబిన్ని కూడా డిక్రీజ్ చేస్తాయి. సో ఇక్కడ మనం చూడొచ్చు ద కార్బోనిక్ యాసిడ్ అనేది బాడీలో ఫామ్ అవుతుంది, అది ఆర్బీసీలో ఫామ్ అవుతూ ఉంటుంది. నెక్స్ట్ టెంపరేచర్ ఎఫెక్ట్ కూడా మనం చూసినాం. విత్ ఇన్ లిమిట్స్ టెంపరేచర్ ఇంక్రీజ్ అవుతుంటే ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది హిమోగ్లోబిన్తో బాండ్ అవడం వదిలేస్తుంది. నెక్స్ట్ ఇక్కడ మనం లాస్ట్ ఫ్యాక్టర్ బీపీజీ అనుకున్నాం. సో దిస్ ఈస్ ద లాస్ట్ ఫ్యాక్టర్, అనదర్ ఫ్యాక్టర్ దట్ ఎఫెక్టింగ్ ద అఫినిటీ ఆఫ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్ ఫర్ ఆక్సిజన్. సో 2,3 బిస్ఫాస్ఫోగ్లిజరేట్, ప్రీవియస్లీ దాన్ని డైఫాస్ఫోగ్లిజరేట్ ఈజ్ అనుకున్నాం. సో 2,3 బిస్ఫాస్ఫోగ్లిజరేట్, ప్రీవియస్లీ దాన్ని డైఫాస్ఫోగ్లిజరేట్ అని అనుకున్నాం. సో దీన్ని ఇట్ ఈస్ ఫౌండ్ ఇన్ ఆర్బీసీస్ డ్యూరింగ్ గ్లైకాలిసిస్ జరిగేటప్పుడు ఆర్బీసీలో ఉంటుంది. ఇట్ డిక్రీజెస్ ద అఫినిటీ ఆఫ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్ ఫర్ O2 అండ్ thus హెల్ప్స్ అన్లోడ్ O2 ఫ్రమ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్. సో ఇది కనుక ఎక్కువ అమౌంట్లో ప్రజెంట్ అయినప్పుడు ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్తో బాండ్ అవ్వడం అనేది జరగదు, తక్కువ జరుగుతుంది. సో బీపీజీ కంబైన్స్ విత్ టెర్మినల్ అమైనో గ్రూప్స్ ఆఫ్ ద 2 బీటా గ్లోబిన్ చైన్స్. సో ఈ బీపీజీ అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్లో ఉన్న టెర్మినల్ అమైనో గ్రూప్స్ తోటి బైండ్ అవుతుంది, ఆక్సిజన్ని బైండ్ అవ్వకుండా చేస్తుంది. ద గ్రేటర్ ద లెవెల్ ఆఫ్ బీపీజీ ద మోర్ O2 ఈజ్ అన్లోడెడ్ ఫ్రమ్ హెమోగ్లోబిన్. సో ఎంత బీపీజీ అమౌంట్ ఎక్కువ ఉంటే O2 అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్తో అంత తక్కువగా బాండ్ అవుతుంది. సో దెన్ బీపీజీని రిలీజ్ చేసేది ఎలా, బీపీజీ ఇంక్రీజ్ అవుతుంది ఆర్బీసీలో అంటే సర్టెన్ హార్మోన్స్ సచ్ యాజ్ థైరాక్సిన్, హ్యూమన్ గ్రోత్ హార్మోన్, ఎపినెఫ్రిన్, నార్ ఎపినెఫ్రిన్ అండ్ టెస్టోస్టెరోన్ ఇంక్రీజ్ ద ఫార్మేషన్ ఆఫ్ బీపీజీ. సో ఇవి బీపీజీ ఫార్మేషన్ని ఇంక్రీజ్ చేస్తాయి. సో మనం కూడా చూసుకోవచ్చు, ఎప్పుడైతే మనకు ఎపినెఫ్రిన్, నాన్ ఎపినెఫ్రిన్ అమౌంట్స్ ఇంక్రీజ్ అవుతాయో మన బాడీలో టెస్టోస్టెరోన్ అమౌంట్స్ ఇంక్రీజ్ అయితే మనకు బ్రెత్లెస్నెస్ లాగా అనిపిస్తుంది, అంటే ఆక్సిజన్ అనేది హెమోగ్లోబిన్తో తక్కువగా బాండ్ అవుతుంది అండ్ ఆక్సిజన్ కర్వ్ అనేది బాడీలో మనం ఫీల్ అవ్వచ్చు. సో ఐ హోప్ ఈ వీడియో అందరికీ అర్థమైందని అనుకుంటున్నాను. సో ఈ వీడియో అందరూ చాలా బాగా వినండి. సో ఈ వీడియో మీరందరూ బాగా శ్రద్ధగా విని ఈ కాన్సెప్ట్స్ అన్నీ అర్థం చేసుకోండి. మీకు ఎలాంటి డౌట్స్ ఉన్నా నా కమెంట్ సెక్షన్లో కమెంట్స్లో మీ డౌట్స్ పోస్ట్ చేయండి. నేను ఖచ్చితంగా ఆ డౌట్స్ని ఆ కమెంట్ సెక్షన్లో మళ్ళీ ఆన్సర్ చేయడం జరుగుతుంది. నెక్స్ట్ ఇలాంటి వీడియోస్ నేను ఇంకా చాలా చేయాలని నా ప్రయత్నం ఉంది, మీరందరూ సహకరించాలి. సో నా ఛానల్ని సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేయండి, ఈ వీడియోని లైక్ చేయండి, షేర్ చేయండి, మీ ఫ్రెండ్స్ అందరికీ చెప్పండి. మీకు ఇంకా తెలుగు ఎక్స్ప్లెనేషన్ ఎక్కువ కావాలన్నా ఐఎమ్ రెడీ టు గివ్. అండ్ ద స్టూడెంట్స్ కొంతమందికి హిందీలో ఎక్స్ప్లెనేషన్స్ కావాలన్నా ఐ కెన్ గివ్ इन एक्सप्लेनेशंस इन हिंदी ऑल्सो. मैं हिंदी में एक्सप्लेनेशंस देने के लिए भी तैयार हूँ. सो जिन बच्चों को हिंदी में एक्सप्लेनेशंस चाहिए मेरे वीडियोस का, मैं हिंदी में भी वीडियोस बनाने के लिए तैयार हूँ. सो आप मेरे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब कीजिए और शेयर कीजिए, लाइक कीजिए. सो until the next session, next video lecture, we'll meet in the next video lecture. Until then, bye, take care.